smoke.
No,
Realize.
my wheel was working pretty good this morning.
Well, good.
So, I like that.
Good. Yeah, usually had pretty good luck. Anyway, so we're taking up the first item on today's agenda is the judiciary's budget for 2025. And I think we'll focus on whoever wants to go first. I know you've got people on line who may be able to answer questions that the committee might have.
That's right, Senator. Thank you very much. Terry Corson, State Court Administrator with Chief Superior Judge Tom Zone. And also, we do have on the Zoom, Greg Mosley, who's the Chief of Finance and Administration, in case there are detailed questions about the financial aspect of the budget. Also, Marcia Shells, who's the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for our Technology Services Center, in case there's questions about the tech aspects of the budget. And Rob Schell, who's our Director of Safety and Security, in case there are questions about the security aspect of the budget. So they're available via Zoom if you have questions that Judge Zone and I are unable to adequately answer. Sorry, did you? Okay.
So I want to make clear what I hope the Judiciary Committee will be able to do, and that is to provide advice to the Appropriations Committee on how to deal with the various facets of the criminal justice budget and civil justice. I realize, and I've talked with Representative Squirrel, there's about $15 million in requests, and I don't know how much money is available over and above the governor's recommend for the criminal and civil justice system. So we're going to have to make tough choices in appropriations, but it might be easier. The committee has recommendations in terms of priorities. One of the things that concerns me about what I saw from Representative Squirrel was funding half year and then expecting 26 to be better and then fully funding 26, which only adds pressure to 26. And I don't think the Senate Appropriations Committee would go along with that. So tough decisions are have to be made on what the priorities are. So if you could, as we go through this, tell us what your number one priority is versus if you know. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to split the baby, I understand.
We're happy to do that as best we can. We'll try to spell it out.
Anyway, with that said, feel free to get started.
Great, thank you so much. So what we're going to do is provide a brief overview of each aspect of the budget, starting with the governor's recommend and then what we're asking for above and beyond that. There are three basic components to it: technology, court operations, and courthouse security. I'm going to give an overview of the budget. Judge Zone is going to address some of the data that's in the materials that we've provided, vis-a-vis the backlog in particular, because we know that's a big focus, especially in terms of the emphasis on public safety. Again, feel free if you have questions, we can answer, or Greg, Marsh, or but we'll do our best to just spell it out. And you have paper copies, I guess, or it's also, okay, great. I start with the mission statement. The mission of the Vermont Judiciary is to provide equal access to justice, protect individual rights, resolve legal disputes fairly and timely, and provide everyone the opportunity to have their day in court. And I start with that because our budget was developed. We did our best to be very intentional to make sure that whatever we're asking for is what's critical to meet our mission. And reading the mission, actually, it struck me how very aligned that is with the focus of your committee. Your committee, more than anyone, knows what pressures are impacting the courts and also what the critical nature of this mission, especially today, where in order to have an orderly society, you have to have properly operating courts. Mm-hmm. So starting with the recommended budget, the governor every year typically gives us the pay act to cover personnel costs. And oftentimes nothing more than that. This year it was unusual that the governor's recommended also included two Superior Court judges, two Superior Court judge positions, which I think was in recognition of the emphasis on public safety. So that was included and we were grateful.
Let me just mention that we did pass out of the committee the bill that created the two positions. It's sitting in the appropriations committee. I think it'll be part of the budget, but it is part of the governor's budget part, and I expect that plus the transfer of the master
Position
to
for the
the
third.
judicial master to becoming a third Superior Court judge. So I think that's pretty well, that's not in question, but they decided not to pass the bill rather than put it into the budget.
I see. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate that because that's critical to us being able to address the existing backlog and then the cases coming in. So above and beyond the governor's recommend, we have our budget requests, which can be, I think, divided into three categories: the tech, court operations, and security. In terms of the tech fund revenue replacement, I don't know if you all have familiarity with the tech fund. You do, I think, Senator, because of your work on appropriations. But there's something called the tech fund that was created 17 years ago in 2007. Same year the iPhone came out, to give you an idea about where technology was at that point. And it basically is funded by three revenue sources, three funds. An administrative surcharge, failure to answer, and failure to pay. And that's what's funded the tech fund all of these years. As you can imagine, because you know in general, in terms of fees, I'm sure you've seen it's been declining over the years. And that's been no exception for the revenue source for the tech fund. In fiscal year 19, there's $1.9 million in the tech fund. For fiscal year 24, $770,000. So the tech fund, which was designed to cover the bulk of the judiciary's tech needs, has steadily declined over the years. By contrast, as you can imagine, the tech needs have increased exponentially, especially with the remote hearings that we have now, the electronic filing, and then just the increased attention and costs associated with technology in general. To give you an example, fiscal year 18, the tech needs for the budget, for the judiciary budget were $1 million. For fiscal year 24, $3.3 million. So as the revenues have decreased, the costs have increased. And this is something that Greg Moosley, I know, has testified over the last several years, saying we're reaching basically a cliff where it's not going to be adequate to meet our tech needs, and the courts cannot operate without the technology. We saw with the independent network what happens when things break down. Courts cannot progress, and we're so grateful to the government, to the legislature, for the independent network that's enabled us to have the reliability that we need in order to operate. But without the tech fund being adequate, we don't have the funds to pay what we need to operate, the license fees, the software, the hardware, and now the cybersecurity.
Let me ask, and I think I know the answer. So the surcharges aren't bringing in enough money to cover that, but we have other agencies, state government or grantees, who are in the same boat. So the basic problem is that we're not having as many people pay their speeding tickets or whatever that would bring in money. Are there other sources of income in the tech fund?
It's those three fees.
Just the fees.
Right. So we're asking that the tech.
Senator Sheen.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've already explored this, but I'm curious, are there potential avenues for federal grants to support improving tech in state courts?
And if you don't mind, I don't know for a fact that Greg or Marcia, I assume, would know if there are. I haven't heard that being discussed. Greg or Marcia, if you're listening.
Yeah, I'm listening. Hi, I'm Marcia Schell's Chief Technology Innovation Officer for the Judiciary. And that's a great question, Senator. We have used extensively one-time money for improvements, and such as I'm not saying grants, but capital funds for the case management system and pandemic funds to put in the WebEx system for remote hearings, as well as a digital evidence management system, which we're going live with now so we can manage our video evidence, for instance. So we utilize such money is really good for investments in new technology, but what the tech fund is not for new technology. It's for the maintenance and support of what we have. So it's keeping the lights on. It's the maintenance to Tyler Technologies for the case management system and the upgrades of our laptops every 3 years and the services for the new network that we're implementing now. So we do, in fact, always look for grant opportunities, and some of them we're even looking at right now for the future, but they only fund these like initial investments.
Thank you.
But it remains that overall, what needs to be looked at by the various committees, and not this committee, is how we're funding many things through surcharges that have diminished. And that's the network against domestic violence and sexual assault and victims compensation fund. A lot of places which are funded through surcharges, and we're just not seeing the same revenues. And I don't know if it's due to lack of, maybe people, I don't think people are driving slower based upon my trips to Montpelier and back.
It's my understanding.
Based upon, when I'm driving 70, based upon the people that are passing me, and I'm sure you all experience that, so.
Yeah, I do. This is part of the same section that you drive.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah,
I know you have the same traffic. You and the chief.
Right, yeah.
So if we can go to the 15 new staff positions.
Sure. And the 15 new staff positions consist of 10 judicial assistants, and this is court operations. And the judicial assistants work both as court staff in the courthouses, and then also we have information center, and those are people that field now, we can, with our technology, field questions that otherwise would go into individual courts and interrupting court staff while they're trying to do the case processing. Calls can be routed to the information center, and they can answer many questions, thereby alleviating pressures on the court staff working in the courts. And then also we have central review, which now with e-filing, they can help process cases as they come in e-filing, again, trying to free up the court staff so that they can manage the hearings that are taking place, scheduling, et cetera. So it's kind of a combined force of those. We learned after kind of analyzing, and this was in response to a request from legislators saying, do we have adequate staffing in our particular county? And we evaluated it, and there are definitely inequalities among court staffing around the state, similar to how the state's attorneys look at how many cases do they have per position. We looked at that. There was an inequity. And this is the number that we feel would allow us to achieve at least the bare minimum for staffing that would be needed for normal court processing. In addition, there are 5 security positions that are in this 15 new staff positions. They're tech related, IT help desk analysts. There are 5,000 calls that come in through the help desk. And that's not just to answer lawyers, but any court users, any agencies that need to access the records, need to access the hearings. 2 centralized service analysts, and that's connected more with the public portal. And one thing that came about that was unexpected, Tyler Technologies, which oversees our public portal, is doing a transition because of cybersecurity concerns to a different platform. And that's going to necessitate our 18,000 persons who have authority to access case records to the public portal to be reissued new authority and to be evaluated, et cetera. Without these analysts, it's going to cause a huge slowdown, if not halt, to people utilizing public portals to access court records. And then a database administrator, there's such an emphasis on data, which we recognize the value between, for example, requests from the legislature asking for different data, grant reporting that requires data. We're using data extensively in our backlog strategies to look at where cases stand and make sure they don't fall through the records. And 3 of these positions now we contract out. And if we're able to have positions instead, we can actually save money, $220,000 potentially, if we can, because we can pay less for a permanent employee versus somebody who is a contracted employee. So that's factored into the approach there. But that's in a nutshell the 15 new staff positions that we're requesting, basically to make sure that we can operate just a bare minimum to make sure we can process the cases as they come in and deal with the backlog. And then the next, I didn't know, Judge Stoney was gonna kind of address, he thought it might be helpful to address the data and some of the backlog strategies, and then I was gonna talk about the court security request after that.
Okay. But going back to the to the 15 new staff,
Yes,
what is the critical number?
well.
Is it 15 or is it, I mean,
Well, I would certainly say in terms of the tech positions, again, our help desk and the public portal, that's the way that people access the court records now and access the hearings. And if we don't have the ability to handle requests coming in to connect, people aren't going to be able to connect. In terms of the judicial assistants, again, this number was arrived at looking at what's kind of bare minimum for these courts to be able to operate. You look at some courts where they have 340 cases per permanent staff position, and we have other courts where it's 260. I mean, there's a big disparity. So trying to enable those courts that are struggling to keep up, that's where those came from. And then the information center and central review, same thing. Courts rely on them very heavily. If they're needing to pick up the phone, which is ringing constantly in the courthouse, they're not then able to address their work if they're answering questions that we found at the information center. So, Senator, I don't mean to be dodging the question. It'd be hard to say what would be. I mean, obviously, we're grateful for however many positions we can receive. We consider these essential. And I mean, we could have said, oh, we would love 30. But we tried to figure out what is kind of, again, the bare minimum to allow us to at least keep our heads above water for these different functions.
One question for you regarding the help desk analysts. I'm curious about the folks who are trying to access their hearings and have to go through the help desk folks. Are there instances of people trying to access their hearings and then missing their hearings just because there's no one available at the help desk?
Well, I don't mean to say that everybody accessing the WebEx hearing goes through the help desk because they get the link. In the notice of hearing, there's the link and they follow the link and that should happen fine. But sometimes people have trouble, and if they can't, that's where the help desk comes in.
Right.
So I can ask Marcia, who would probably know in terms of that specific question. I know that we've had people, and Judge, you can probably address that, where people haven't been able to connect, not necessarily even because it was a court WebEx issue, but maybe their broadband or maybe their type of, but that's where the help desk would come in to try to.
Yeah.
So Marcia, do you have any?
Well, I think I'm not sure that that this is clear that right now we have these positions, but they're limited service and they're ending as of this fiscal year. They were positions that we acquired during the pandemic. And so this would be, if we don't get these positions, we're going to be like falling off the cliff as far as customer service. And I mean, I'll give you an example. Right now, we have our help desk analysts are out in the field doing migrations to the new network, and that has severely impacted our ability to answer the help desk in a timely manner. So we're really looking forward to getting done with that, which is going to be in about 2 weeks, and being back to being able to actually answer the phone. And I just can't imagine if we don't get these positions, what we will do. And we could outsource, like Terry mentioned, but I hate to do that because it costs the state more money.
Let's moving right along. The language access program.
The language access program is to cover.
We did that last year.
It was one-time funding for the interpretive fees for whatever reason, and they said come back this year to request it. It'd be better to build it into the budget, but it was, and I don't, Greg would be able to.
It's federally required, as I remember.
It is required, right? And this is what's
So
projected.
we kind of have to do this for the whatever.
To meet our requirements under the Department of Justice directives. Because if someone needs an interpreter, we're bound to provide it. And these are the projected costs based on the numbers from last
By the
year.
way, Maria from Joint Fiscal is here too.
Amy.
Emily,
Amy.
Amy, I'm sorry, Amy. I sit next to her all day. It's the wrong name. Amy, thank you. I just wanted to mention Amy is. She's from Joint Fiscal and helping the Senate she works with the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I sit next to her all day and I get the wrong name. So embarrassing. Anyway,
That's what that
that's
is.
like if I was to put the number one, that has to be funded, right?
Well, we're required by law to provide interpreters.
Well, I mean, yeah. I remember doing that last year, and I thought, I didn't realize we did it one time.
And there was a reason, which Greg may know the answer to, and that's why it's back again this year.
Okay, well, that actually helps us to prioritize.
Okay, great.
All right,
And Judge Zonday thought it might be helpful to provide some of the data, and if you were interested in terms of, you had asked about numbers pre-pandemic and today, and we have the figures through yesterday, I guess.
So I won't go too far into the weeds on this. The data in many ways speaks for itself, but if you look at the criminal division pre-pandemic and now January of 21, the past 3 years, we have seen a decrease. The misdemeanors have shot down. Felonies have kind of maintained, as has the other. So when we look at the pending cases as of March 19th, we also look at, okay, what percent are over disposition guidelines? And that's the other chart number on slide number 10. And you see, we broke it down by counties. So we can identify the counties where we have the older cases that need to be addressed. We also go on to look at the pending cases in civil division, pre-pandemic and now. We have the data for the family division. And in some of the dockets, as you see, it kind of maintains a consistency. In the civil, we've gone down quite a bit. In
can
small
we go back
claims,
to the?
Yep.
Well, I think, I don't know, I don't have a number on.
it's slide 10 you're looking at.
Well, it's 319.
Yep.
Pending criminal case. How do I read this? Is it Orleans County 65%
That's correct.
versus 28% in Addison? Which is better?
The 28%. That means that 65% of the pending cases in Orleans County currently has 1,512 pending cases. Out of those 1,512 pending cases, 65% are past the disposition guidelines that are set.
So when the state's attorneys come in, I should be asking them about why is Caledonia at 62%, Rutland, Orleans at 65%, and Washington and Wyndham at 22, 28, 33. Why are some of these counties so far back? Bennington at 45%. But I'm particularly looking at, Orleans and Caledonia.
So what we know is that when we were down extra judges, we didn't have the judicial resources we needed up there. There was not enough judicial time. We were pulling in Judge Kanan, for instance, who's now sitting in Caledonia. He was coming up from Wyndham Civil to do the juvenile work. Judge Rainville was coming over from Chittenden County to do the juvenile work in Orleans and the RFA work. And it was causing the judges who were there working on the criminal side to try to do family and balance a lot. What we do know, though, is that as of this morning, clearance rates. A clearance rate is how many cases in, how many cases out. It's helpful. It's not the test for everything, but it gives you a good idea. Since we've added, what happened with the new judges coming in with the last batch of appointments at the end of January, we changed things. We now have 2 judges in Orleans and 2 judges in Caledonia that cover Caledonia and Essex. If you look at Caledonia, the criminal clearance rate in February was 107%. So that definitely is attacking the number of cases. In March, as of today, it's 253% in Caledonia. In Orleans, in February is 173%, and in March it's 110. So the gaps that we had there from inadequate judicial resources based upon vacancies, we have now filled, and we're starting to see some results. That's not the only reason, though. There's other reasons, and that has to do with do we have the number of staff to be able to go in with the judges to do the trials all the time? We've had some staffing issues up in the Northeast Kingdom, and so those are being addressed. And it also has to do with, in some counties, for instance, there's charging policies and resolution policies that might be different that will address some of the older cases where they'll go in like we saw in Franklin County. They sat down, talked about the old cases, and decisions were made to get rid of a bunch of older cases so you could focus on the newer ones. If something like that is done, you'll see that percentage over disposition number go down significantly when you start getting rid of the older cases.
So if I look at Bennington County, for example, 45%, but we know that 2 new judges from Bennington County were just appointed by the governor, which should provide more resources.
Well, they're currently sitting in Rutland, but yes,
But-
they should, because
but-
that allows
I mean,
other judges to go
Yeah.
there. Bennington County, once we have the additional judges that came in, because that
we
allowed
don't
us,
mind those judges from Rutland County, just so you know.
Judge
I think
Barra.
there's a judge for Sones and Barra.
It's good to get them down there. Judge Barra had been over in Wyndham County for one of the vacancies, doing double duty.
Poor guy, you know, he wanted to be in Bennington.
Well, doesn't everyone?
Yeah, I did.
Like it. But Bennington, in February, the criminal clearance rate, 126. In March, 123. In Rutland, in February, 153. Today, in March, 164. So things have changed. Chittenden, we added some judges. February was 94. Interestingly enough, Judge Spiro started later because she was a few weeks behind. So she's really started being in there now in March. March, 123. So I think what we're seeing is by adding the judges in those areas, it's addressing the backlogs in a way that the disposition numbers will go down. And what else have we done? Well, I'll jump ahead a little bit. When you look at the slide on case flow management, it's easy to say, well, we're going to start adding more time. We're going to add X. We're going to do Y. But the question is it going to work? And so what we've done is we've looked at established case flow management principles from across the country. We've talked to judges and administrators from other courts across the country. And we've said we're going to establish principles for case flow management, how we're doing things. We've talked to the attorneys in the state of Vermont, the other stakeholders. We have had statewide and unit-specific backlog plans. We look at pending cases. We're setting next events in cases, and we're reviewing scheduling strategies.
Does this include the civil dockets?
Yes, but we are doing this in our dockets to try to get all the numbers down.
And is it 3 dockets?
It's 4 when we look at civil, family, criminal, and probate.
Oh, okay, you're including probate.
We're including, but we're trying to look at all the cases to make sure things go. Probate is a little bit different given the nature of it, but the other dockets, judges have sat back and said, okay, what can we do? We have bench bars where they talk to the attorneys and say, okay, what do you think? And then we try to put everything together. And we think it actually is going in the right direction. One of the things I did a few weeks ago was I sent out a list to the judges in criminal courts who had individuals that had 10 or more open dockets and said, what's happening with these cases? I want to make sure that you're aware of these cases because you had some people who had significant numbers. And so that enables the courts to bring them in and start to focus on those cases to make sure that you're looking at the big picture. It's not just, okay, we have an unlawful trespass, but it makes sure that the judges are aware that this person with one unlawful trespass has 12 other charges. And those are the areas that we're seeing a lot of, I'll say, frustration in the community. And it's fair that we are addressing that. And so we're trying to take steps by taking a critical look at the cases. And that's something we're continuing to do. We think it works. We're bringing cases in. We're advancing cases. If an attorney and the state come in and say, well, we've reached a plea agreement, but if we in the court can't schedule that agreement to take place for a change of plea for 2 or 3 months, that's not good. Unless there's a reason it has to be put off, we should be scheduling those promptly. So I've visited with the judges and staff, and we're trying to now implement where we're moving things up. In Rutland, for instance, there were a number of changes of plea that were set out into March. When the new judges started at the end of January, when we knew we were going to have extra judicial resources, they were brought up a month into February. We moved them up because it was important. And so we're continuing to try to move things up and provide spaces in the daily docket where they can do changes of plea, not waiting that long. I know that's something that I think the state supports also.
If we could just jump to, I've got about 15 minutes left, and if you could jump to the steps taken to address backlog.
We're trying to use remote technology as much as we can. We've tried to use it with not only the dockets where people are not incarcerated, but the dockets where people are incarcerated, predominantly criminal docket. We're trying to maximize that because the Department of Corrections is squeezed, the sheriffs are squeezed for transports, everyone is tight. We're having difficulty getting transports for civil cases, PCRs, furlough cases. We're having difficulty getting transports for matters involving termination of parental rights and in the family division juvenile court. And so we're trying to balance all of that by maximizing our utilization of remote technology. That also allows attorneys from Chittenden, they don't have to travel down for every hearing if they're helping out doing caseload relief for the Defender General in Rutland or Windham counties or somewhere else. We're developing new data measures. Consistently, our data people are coming up with new ways. We just came up with a new data measure about a month or so ago. We were in discussions with Chair Lalonde, who was asking for some data, and literally that day, I got an email saying we have this new data measure, which basically answered what he was looking for. And so it's nice to know that we're on the same page, and B, we're getting it done. We review the data. It's one thing to have it, it's another to use it. And so we're encouraging judges to do it. And as I said, there are times where I will send out data to the judges focused. I'm not yesterday I picked up the phone and called a judge in a specific docket in a specific area and said, what's going on here? This morning I sent out an email asking, the clearance rate's pretty low, what's the problem? So I try to stay on top of that, and the judges stay on top of that too, because we care, and the staff does. We want to get these cases heard. And we're also trying to increase jury draws and trial dates.
I know that. I noticed that. I got a letter.
We're adding on there. One of the impediments.
Unfortunately, I couldn't serve in January.
Well, but we'll get you in the spring.
But you'll get me in July. I volunteer.
But one of the impediments we have there, we were thinking and
I
trying
hope I
to.
get a lot of DUI cases.
We'll keep you on juror for life. We'll make special rules.
I'm fine.
Put that in the bill.
That'd be a good job, right?
But one of the issues that has arisen when we're trying to schedule more is when we look at staffing. And so staffing is intertwined with needing enough staff to
So
be able to do
15
that.
new positions is partly to keep things moving.
Absolutely.
The one complaint I've heard from the press is about the WebEx or remote technology and their inability. They want to be able to view it remotely and not have to come to court. And the judges are saying, you got to come to court and sit around and wait, and even though it's remote. Is there any?
There is a policy that Terry and myself had put out. If it is an in-person hearing and there's no remote technology utilized, we do not turn on WebEx. It is an in-person hearing, and the public, including the press, is certainly welcome to come. If it is an in-person hearing and it is being utilized, WebEx is being utilized for a single witness, that is still considered an in-person hearing, and it's not something that WebEx or live stream is part of. If it is a remote hearing, it is absolutely the right of the public as well as the press to watch it on WebEx.
So it's a single witness. So you had a witness from Florida. The press would have to sit in the courtroom to hear from that.
Because it's not that is
just
not
like
a
the
hybrid
judge
hearing.
has to sit in the courtroom.
That's correct. If we're doing a jury trial and they say, well, everybody agrees that we're going to have one witness from Florida, that does not suddenly convert it to a hybrid hearing, which the press or public can watch via WebEx or a remote hearing. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I would just note that the business of the court is to address the administration of justice in a way that we're focused on parties taking care of things in the court while allowing the public absolute access as much as they can possibly have. And we're just not if we start getting to the point where we're going to start having to do production and be court TV for every case, that takes away from the ability of the judicial assistants to focus. It also raises questions, frankly, about what happens if the technology's not working and someone was banking on it. Then we're going to be stopping a jury trial in the middle of a victim's testimony because nobody can hear it. So there's a lot of reasons, but we believe that we are providing significant access, more than we ever have before.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And then the third aspect of our,
And we
sorry.
passed S-17, that screwed everything up.
That's the third part of the budget that I was gonna talk about now. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, let's go there.
So S-17 was the bill that the legislature directed us to report in terms of what
Yeah.
three things, how many sheriff deputies and court security are needed for efficient court operations, if there's a classified position associated with that request, to explain that, and then the corresponding budget request. So Rob Shell, who's the director of security, and I went to each and every courthouse around the state, gathered input from the court staff, from the judges, from the local users. And then we had three primary stakeholders that were directed through the S-17 mechanism, and that was the Sheriff's Association, State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and BSEA. We met with them, consulted with them. We also involved all the other agencies that are very frequent court users. Certainly the Defender General's Office, OCS, DOC, Corporation of Parole, DCF, Vermont Legal Aid, BGS, of course, for the state courthouses, the VBA. We consulted and came up with a report. It was a really helpful exercise, and looked at there were different factors that impacted the recommendations as to the numbers. That had to do with the roles. There are three basic roles in the courthouses. The screener, which is an armed law enforcement officer, that our recommendation is one in each and every courthouse, so that you have that line of defense to prevent weapons from entering the courthouse. The point is to substantially reduce the risk of harm. If there's no weapons that get by, then you don't have, that substantially reduces the risk of harm once they get in. There's also a rover position, which is armed law enforcement as well. They're there to respond to issues wherever they might be in the courthouse, the courtroom, in the courthouse, outside the courthouse. Rover positions at the busier courts in particular, and then in the courtrooms themselves when hearings are happening, a court security officer position. And that led to a new classified position we're calling court security officer, where they're not armed, they're unarmed. They are trained specifically for court hearings and the risks that could arise in a court hearing. De-escalation, for example, or if there is a physical need to respond, to be able to retain, to hold and retain until the law enforcement arrives. So the three different positions, screener, rover, and then court security officer, are the levels that we're looking at. We also looked at the different levels of risk associated with different types of hearings. Criminal certainly has the highest incidence and the highest risk of there being a security risk. Family would be next. Right now, there's a court officer in every hearing room where there's a criminal hearing or a family hearing taking place. And this recommendation continues that practice. It's also recommended, though, that we have court security officers available in civil, in probate, in judicial bureau, and in environmental as needed. Because on occasion, you do have situations where there's a security risk. And normally, I say normally, it's the judge's discretion, knowing the litigants, knowing the type of hearing, to say, we need a court officer in this hearing room. And this recommendation allows to have adequate personnel to respond to those kinds of needs based on history and based on, in general, this increased level of stress, if you will, and security risks around the country. I think you all have probably seen the viral video of the person basically leaping over the bench and attacking the judge in Nevada. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an example. I mean, they would have said the day before, this would never happen here, I'm sure. Being mindful of those kinds of risks that are just increasing.
One question on the sheriff's deputies.
Yes.
Have you reached this $52.89 an hour, and what is it currently per hour? I think we settled on 45, if I remember.
Right, Greg is on the phone.
What did we settle on current rate per hour for sheriff's deputies?
2 years ago, we brought it up to $45 an hour, and then last year it went up to $51 an hour. And this rate that you see in the S-17 recommendation represents a 3.7.
Having a hard time hearing you, Greg.
Okay, sorry. This represents a 3.7% increase from last year. Last year's rate is $51 an hour.
Did you hear that?
No.
The 52.89 is a 3.7% increase, which is the cost of living. Last year was 51.89. Did you say, Greg?
$51 even.
Oh, 51 even is the current.
Yeah, 51 even last year or this year. So it's, you're just increasing by 3.7%.
Right,
And the 5 million is really the increase in the number, but you're decreasing private security guards
yes.
by an annual of 84 grand. Or why don't you subtract that out of the total cost?
It is subtracted out in that third column,
Oh,
the
okay.
differential. The resulting net is 18.82, if you will, an additional 7 sheriff's
Okay.
deputies, taking out the private security guards, and then the judicial officers, again, trained to be in the courtroom specifically, primarily for security while hearings are happening. It also includes a component that came about with all these interactions and consultations and cooperations that have to do with if a hearing ends. If a hearing ends early, if it gets continued, if it gets postponed, so that these court officers are not sitting unproductively, it authorizes them to provide administrative tasks. If they're not fulfilling their primary security role, if the hearing ends for whatever reason. Right now, can be downtime if something happens, which isn't unusual, if there's a continuance, for example. This would enable them to fulfill specified administrative tasks. What comes to mind for me is expungements. That's something that they could work on, and it's something you can pick up, take up, put down, without needing to have a long uninterrupted attention to it. So different tasks like that, so that they're being used productively, and that will also help in terms of court staff, because court staff would otherwise be doing those expungements when they can. Right now, it's something that you kind of do after the essential scheduling work, courtroom work, whatever's needed, like triage at the moment. This would be one example of what an administrative task could be that these court officers could fulfill when they're not providing the security function during hearings.
So your new ask, the biggest one is the 21 judicial officer twos. Currently, you have 17 judicial officer ones.
The court officers, right, and it's just judiciary employed. I think that's what the JUD is, but it's court security officers.
So the big is 1.9 million for the 21 new, and then 300,000
For
or
supervisors.
200,000 extra for so the newest you're talking about. This is what S17 recommends.
Yes, and I just wanted to mention that in the court officer role also are 5 statewide court officers. This was something we implemented during the pandemic. We were able to with pandemic monies. Somebody that's centrally assigned by Rob Shell throughout the state wherever they might be needed, because we would have somebody calling in sick somewhere. They're a court officer. We don't want to have to cancel the hearings if we don't have a court officer in the criminal courtroom. So they could be assigned, and it's been very effective and very useful, very worthwhile. So that's those 5 positions are part of that 21, just to mention that. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Please finish your sentence. No, so I'm trying to make sense of this, and I remember in S17, because that was out of my other committee, we had a lot of conversation about whether these would be classified state employees, and it's unclear to me in this if the proposal is for classified state employees or contracted employees.
Classified state, the sheriffs are contracted, and the 21 court hearing room officers would be classified positions.
So my concern about the sheriffs being contracted positions is we heard testimony in my other committee that they don't believe they're going to be able to hire enough contracted positions, and their preference is for classified state employees. So
that really wasn't what came about from our collaboration, because the sheriff supported this approach.
okay.
I don't know, Greg or Rob, if you wanted to talk about that in particular, whether the sheriffs, because they definitely support this.
Yeah, and perhaps something has changed. I just remember
Why
they
don't we
testified
wait
in GovOps last year.
I
They couldn't.
prefer to wait until John Campbell
Okay.
and the state's attorneys and sheriffs are in. Your intent is to hire 40, whatever the number was, of sheriffs, an increase in the number of sheriff deputies covering, and not use private security anymore.
Right. And
That's a huge change. You're shifting from private security in Chittenden and Wyndham and other places. And the question would be for the sheriffs is, can they deliver that number? I think that's, I
Yes.
think it would be better to ask the sheriffs.
The sheriff's right, but it's our understanding.
Your plan is to hire this extra sheriffs plus your own court officers.
Well, we contract with the sheriffs. They
Yeah.
hire the sheriffs. And
No, I know, you
Yeah.
contract with them yeah.
Right, but we would be hiring the court officers, and in terms of the private security, I mean, it's our understanding that the classified positions would be advantageous because they could be state employees and the benefits would be potentially better. And we've had private security officers who have applied for, when we've had openings for court security, they've applied for and, been hired in those positions.
Are there any other questions for the court? Thank you very much, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got some difficult choices ahead of us.
We don't
Have a good
envy
day.
I don't remember you either, but.
you. Thank you.
So next up is our Attorney General to report budget, and we're gonna, I hopefully pay a particular focus on the diversion and restorative justice.
Yes. Well, I will say a few words and then I will turn it over to the co-director of our community justice unit, Willa Farrell. You know her well. But did we send over some slides?
Pardon?
Yeah, okay. So what I did,
Slides.
I pulled out some of the slides. Oh, we also have Marcy Hodgson on Zoom. Marcy is basically our CFO. She's the numbers whiz, although Willa is pretty darn good when it comes to her own budget. So we're all here to make sure that you get all your questions answered. But anyway, so I pulled the slides that we had presented to both the House and Senate appropriations committees for you. I just wanted to, first of all, say thanks for having us in, and we really appreciate your interest in making sure that you all understand this program. I first wanted to just go over, do an overview, look at the overview slide, which is the first slide that you've got, so that you have a little context. The mission we just revised using the Chief Performance Office, who's absolutely wonderful and I always want to brag about. It looks like this, minus my handwriting. So this is a new mission we're really proud of. We worked really hard on it, so wanted to flag that for you. And we were fans of the governor's recommended budget. There's just one piece of information that we didn't have when we made our ask of the governor for his budget. So they knew that was coming, and that is $296,000 to support diversion, and that number comes from an assessment that we had done to identify, and really this is about geographic equality, if you will, making sure that all of the different regions are getting the resources that they need, equivalent to other regions. So we kind of identified places where they didn't have enough people, but they had caseloads that merited more people, and so that's where that ask comes from. Otherwise, we actually liked the governor's recommend, which was 16.4 million total. This pie chart is about spending. And you can see where everything comes from, and not to belabor the point, but we have a lot going on in our office. Some of it is court diversion and criminal work, but not all of it. And we wanted to just give you the overview. We have almost 100 attorneys general. I wonder if we have, with me, we have 100 exactly. So there's 99 AAGs, assistant AGs, and then me. We have classified positions. We have a lot of our positions are embedded in other agencies in state government where we're serving as their lawyers. So we have, the tax department, the agency of transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have,
We've had interesting discussions in prior attorney generals about those embedded in other offices and frequently, particularly the early years of the Scott administration, there was an attempt to separate out. They had attorneys that were part of the executive branch, that were working for certain. So some were embedded and some were
Mhm.
executive. It was always difficult to figure out what was going on.
It feels complicated, but the Attorney General's office is a law office. We're the largest
Right.
law office in the state, and it works well to have certain lawyers be
And you have
together.
to defend the agency of
Yes.
transportation, for example,
Yep.
when they put up a sign that says low grip. Going up Killington on Tuesday, there's a sign that says low grip. What the hell does that mean? I've seen slippery, I've seen all kinds of stuff, but have a low grip.
I will look into that.
But anyway, no, I don't ask you to look into that, but it's an example of, you know, the agency of transportation puts up a sign, low grip, I don't know what the hell that means.
Yeah, well, we do have lawyers there. We have a whole team of lawyers at transportation. And we have, I'm highlighting, we have 6 divisions, as I've listed here. The administration is where, you know, IT is, and Marcy and those folks. Environmental and public protection, you know, our consumer work is there, our civil rights work is there, and of course, environmental. Criminal is self-explanatory. That's where our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force resides, which is like literally a T&C law enforcement agency who deals exclusively with child sexual abuse materials and related crimes. Then the General Counsel and Administrative Law Division is where all of these embedded lawyers are, and it's also where Willa and the Community Justice Division reside. We have our Human Services Division. Those lawyers are mostly located in Waterbury, serving the Agency of Human Services in various capacities. And then the Civil Division is that division that does the civil as opposed to criminal defense. So that's the overview. I wanted to say a few things about court diversion and pretrial services, and then I'll turn it over to Willa to walk through the actual budget.
Sounds good.
Just some, I think, interesting facts that you might not be aware of. The pretrial services and court diversion is an integral part of our criminal justice system. It uses restorative justice principles, and it's amazing in so many ways. It's very effective. I'm always bragging about it. I'm very proud of it. But here's some statistics that you might not be aware of. Approximately 20% of misdemeanors, 20%, are referred to court diversion. So that's a high number. Over a third of delinquencies are referred to juvenile court diversion. Close to 90% successfully complete diversion, which is a really good number.
Yeah, that is.
And judges issue pretrial services orders in almost 15% of criminal cases. So we really appreciate all of the support that we continue to get from the legislature, and we are an integral part of the criminal justice system, and so we really appreciate your support. Recently, we have been tasked, last session you'll recall, Act 11 that allows referral of domestic violence and sexual violence cases to community justice centers. So we've been working on that, and this year the House has passed, it hasn't passed the Senate yet, H645 that would bring the pre-charge.
Take that up next week.
Oh, good.
We would hope to hear from somebody in your office
Yeah.
as well as Willa. We also want to look at the diversion budgets or community justice center budgets next week as well.
Okay, that's great.
We've had a lot of concern about, particularly about the corrections, so-called cut of 900,000.
Okay, yeah, for me, the tension is if we take the program, we also need the funding that goes along with it, but.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, just, so,
I have nobody on this committee, I don't believe, has any preconceived notions about H645
Okay.
yet. We're completely open-minded.
Oh, good. Well,
I've heard some rumbling.
let me say the obvious. So we get a large chunk of money that we
Right.
award in the form of grants to our community justice centers. So that's the basic model of what we do. Those grants are managed by Willa, who's been doing this for many, many years. And that amount it's almost $3 million, $2.8 million. I mentioned the request already for the additional above the governor's recommend of $296,000.
Right.
So we can talk a little bit more about that later. And I just wanted to give you that overview. And we love bragging about community justice and division. So I'm happy to be here, and I'll turn it over to Willa and give her the chair so she can walk you through the slides that really get into the nitty gritty.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Madam
I'll be right
Attorney General.
here. I'll be right here listening.
But must say, your 296 is a little easier than the 6 million from the judiciary. Okay.
Good morning, Senator Sears. For the record, Willa Farrell, Attorney General's Office, Court Diversion and Pretrial Services Director. So I appreciate the introduction from Attorney General Clark, and I think I could, if it works for you, I would just dive right into.
Why don't you dive right into the diversion budget?
Diversion budget.
Page, I would guess, page 3 of your slides.
Yes, we have a bit of overview.
Yeah, I'm wondering about cutting the corners. We're still trying to figure that out in appropriation, why so many documents have gotten longer.
Oh, that's
Are they
interesting.
saving money on paper?
There's some preliminary information, which I think many of you are familiar with, about the successful completion rate and other metrics that we track around court diversion. But the slide that is labeled funding requested is probably the one that I think is of most interest this morning. But of course, I'm happy to provide any more information. As AG Clark referenced, our office did an analysis with the grantees of caseloads and existing funding. And we identified 4 programs which covered 5 counties that are named there that have much higher caseloads compared to the statewide average. I do want to note that there are certainly pressures around the state and all communities, and that we were trying to present the biggest pressure in recognition of funding pressures statewide. So in these 4 programs, we've identified where they could use an additional 1 or half of a staff person, and with salary and benefits and an administrative rate, we came up with this figure.
With all of the programs in Chittenden, is that covering all of them or just the 1 or 2?
We only, at this point, we only fund 1 organization in each county.
Okay.
And this, in Chittenden County, we have a grant with the Burlington Community Justice Center.
Okay.
And for court diversion and pretrial services, they are serving all of that county.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot. And it's a very active program. And it, not referenced earlier, is also within court diversion are also the underage alcohol and possession civil violations. So there's a full range of work that's being done by our grantees. Yes.
All right, well, that's helpful. Gosh, I'm sure there's some members of this committee that are interested in Franklin Grand Isle too. Senator Norris is on Zoom today, so it's good to have him back. Senator, are you interested in that one?
You're muted, Bob. You are muted.
Of course I am.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure you were interested in the 72,000 additional for Franklin Grand Isle.
Well, we're always interested in it.
You're looking good, Bob.
Yeah.
Well, I try. The bar's been set kind of high, Phil.
Yeah, I thought we wouldn't see it till Friday, but very swift recovery.
Yes, the medical profession does wonders nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go
So
ahead.
I'm sorry. I might have the 72,000. If you might, Senator Sears, might have missed that one. What was the question on that?
There's a request. If you look, you probably don't have the document, but the Attorney General is asking for roughly 296,000 more than the governor recommend, and it's for diversion counties, Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle, Lamoille, and Washington. And Franklin, Grand Isle is 72.9, Lamoille is only 37.7, and Washington 79, and Chittenden's 106,000. So what her request is above the governor's recommend is the total, and I was only kind of getting you to see Senator Baruch by asking if you were in support of that. Senator Bowski.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you might not be the right person to ask, because I know our diversion funding and restorative justice funding kind of comes in multiple
Yes.
different places. So if this is not the right bucket, just let me know. But we did hear from DCF that they recommend an increase of 600,000 to $1 million in order to support raising the age that additional year, specifically for barge, I think is what they were talking about. Are you the right person to ask about that, or is that a different?
That's a separate
Okay.
funding stream.
Perfect. Well, then
In
disregard.
I think Senator Sears alluded to this. There are essentially three parts of state
Yes.
government, our office, DCF, and DOC, that fund community-based restorative justice
Yep.
services.
No, I knew that there were multiple buckets. I'm just
Yes.
not always clear on which bucket what falls in.
I have a little, I didn't make copies. I wasn't sure whether this would come up, but I'm happy to send it to the committee that identifies the three funders.
Yeah, that might be helpful
Yes.
for next week, because
Okay.
we're gonna try to hear from the various agencies and you again, but more on from you. That would be helpful to have next week.
Okay,
If you could send it to Ben.
I'll do that.
Print it out.
Yes.
The real challenge, there's a couple of challenges in the diversion, and that's, there was 900,000 that corrections granted through justice reinvestment, that corrections thought was one time, and the community justice centers thought was permanent. And so now they're saying, well, we're getting a $900,000 cut. Corrections is saying it was one-time money, and there's no reason to believe that they won't get the same amount through justice reinvestment this year, but it is at one time, or is it permanent funding? And that's one of the questions that we're gonna have to deal with next week when we look at the overall fund diversion.
But I knew it might be the wrong place to ask the question, but.
No, there's those three issues.
Yeah.
And you're right that there is the expectation that if once you raise the age, there'll be more people diverted. Given the success rate of the diversion program, then you would expect that there'll be less crime. And more
Save the
success.
system money overall.
Pardon?
I said that should save the system money overall.
It never does. Or at least they don't report it.
Of course not.
Well, actually, there is reported. That's how justice reinvestment works.
And I think I have to note that probably what is obvious, that a case that goes through court diversion is much less costly than a case that would go through the court system. You can tell just based on the salary numbers that were projected.
Well,
and from a study that Crime Research Group, and I think it's in your slide, that did a cost comparison of what it cost to have a case go through diversion. A simple assault case, I think, is the one we pulled. So through diversion, that cost,
slide are you?
that was number 4.
Court diversion and pretrial services.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Diversion is cost effective.
Okay.
So that is, it's a study that really quantified the cost difference done by Crime Research Group of the case processing through court diversion compared to one that went through the court system and through, with prosecutors and defense attorney and judge and court time. It's nice to have the specifics. I mean, it's logical given that we're working with community-based services compared to highly trained lawyers and judges. So.
You get much possession, alcohol, and marijuana?
There are about 500, it's about 500 youth a year that come through the program. That's all the civil. So
How do we
under
judge
21.
successful completion, that they're not, that
So
they actually completed the program, or that
Yes.
they went back to?
So we don't track people long-term. We don't have the resource to do that. So completing the program means finishing the agreement. So typically the agreement with the underage possession program is people do a screening. They meet with a staff person and discuss, why they use, how to reduce their use, what are the healthy ways that they can address whatever they're, whether they're saying it's stress or peers that contribute to their use. And those who we think are at more moderate or higher risk get referred to a clinician, and they're required to complete the assessment and some preliminary treatment.
Connecting defendants to substance use and mental health treatment. Are communities facing hurdles in finding people to do both?
Yes.
And how much of a problem is it for? This is obviously a little bit out of the realm, but it's a concern of mine in the budget, and we expect people to be able to get treatment, and whether it be substance use or mental health, and they're not able to.
I can't quantify it, Senator Sears, but I know it is a significant and serious problem that our staff see, both in court diversion and pretrial services, that the people who are coming to them often have serious mental health or substance use problems, and that it is hard to get people into treatment. And you may be able to get an assessment, but there may be a wait time before treatment. It varies by county what the wait lists are, but it's a challenge around the state.
Last year, when I asked my local mental health center if there was a waiting list, they said no, and I believe there is.
Certainly know in Chittenden County, we have an extensive wait list at our designated mental health agency. In fact, a lot of outpatient counseling has been closed. The wait list is so long that they are no longer accepting new names. And I certainly know that my wait list is probably 1 year to 2 years long at this point for my practice.
Senator Shane.
Thank you. So I have no doubt that diversion is cost effective and less expensive than court prosecution, but I'm confused as to how the numbers were calculated on page 4. So for example, court prosecution, taking into account the time and cost for the defender, the prosecutor, the judge, and other court staff, how is $1,480 the cost for prosecuting a simple assault?
As I recall, and CRG did this study a few years ago, they had previously done a time study, I think, of prosecution of cases probably for the judiciary, I'm assuming, and they used that as the comparison. And then in 4 of our programs, we did a time study for a month or 2, tracking by case how many hours people worked with the person referred and the victim. And then they looked at that time and the budgets. Our programs submit budgets and then quarterly financial reports. So they use that information to calculate. And I can send you the study that provides more of their methodology, but that's a brief summary of how they came to that.
No problem. I was just curious because, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the Attorney General's office? Thank you so much, both of you, for coming over. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Committee, before we take a break, I've got Senator Brock has a strike all amendment to the interrogation bill.
Yeah.
And as you know, since I voted against it, makes it difficult for me. But I wonder if we should pass over today and schedule time for Senator Brock tomorrow morning, or should we try to deal with it a little earlier? But, I don't know where we'll be at 11:30. So the question is, he sent 6 copies. It's a strike call. I believe the main thing it does is goes back to the 18-year-old. And I leave it up to I'm gonna hand it out. So, obviously Senator Norris doesn't have it, but Ben can maybe send it to him somehow.
Senator Norris, I will have, the committee assistant from Economic Development send me a copy and I will get this to you as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ben.
Is this, is he proposing changes in all this language, or everything is underlined?
Yeah, he's probably done a
strike
strike
all.
all, but I think the basic change is that,
Well, it would be nice if there was some indication what he was changing from our draft.
yeah.
Otherwise, we've got to go word by word.
Right.
I am inclined to suggest we pass over today and bring council and Senator Brock in to walk us through what this does.
That's fine with me. Why don't we?
It is gonna hang it over the weekend for second and third reading.
Huh?
If we do second reading tomorrow, it will hang over for third reading. I don't know if that's a factor, but.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So Senator Ben, can we reschedule tomorrow morning we have the judge at 9 and see if Senator Brock can join us at 9:30 to go over with Ben Novogelsky.
Yes, tomorrow.
Changes to S.
And Mr. Chair, could I suggest that we ask Ben for a highlighted draft?
Yeah.
So we know it's different.
Ben, could you ask Ben for a?
Yep, and so for tomorrow.
Direct Ben to Ben.
I think that my conversations with Randy, the two problems he had was one, that it was for everyone that went to 18. He also didn't like the idea that the read method was banned, which I said to him, well, that's been discredited. And he said, well, no, it hasn't. I used it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No, he has a long history with it apparently, but
Yeah.
that doesn't
mean it's
neither
right.
here nor there.
Senator, I actually just happen to have a half an hour more just to be determined at 11 tomorrow. Would you like to just put it in right there?
We're on the floor at 11:30.
Okay, so I can move it up till 9:30.
Just move everything else.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if we get stuck, I'd rather make sure we've got this if we're gonna go on the floor with it.
Okay, so I'll put it at 9:30.
Put it at 9:30 to 10. So why don't we take our break now and come back and see if, the state's attorneys can be ready at 20 minutes, 25 of, that's where the 7 is on the clock.